Hi, welcome back to FutureFast, and we once again have Paul with us. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'd urge you to look up the first part of the conversation we've had with Paul, and you get an understanding of his background and where this conversation is going to from here on. So, from that context, it's really important that you listen to that part and then come on here. And for the rest of you, I hope you're enjoying it, and also thank you for following us, and do share it among the people you think who enjoy this kind of a conversation. And for those who are new, once again, this is to bring people such as Paul who are doing things and that are bound to have an impact over the future. And the whole idea of bringing these people onto this conversation is to understand other things, tips, pointers that we can take, which we could potentially employ in our own businesses or things that we're doing. And if not, just open up our minds, and hope you enjoy it and enjoy the ride. With that, Paul, once again, thank you so much, and welcome back once again to Future Fast.
Pleased to be here.
So, Paul, we did talk about why you got into this space, obviously from a very early age, and can you talk about what's happening in this very decarbonization space now? Because obviously, governments want to be doing things in this. There are a lot of international agencies that are talking about it. But what's happening from a technology perspective in the decarbonization space?
So there's the good, the bad, the ugly, and the absurd going on. That's probably the best way to put it. The good is that we're gradually, and in some places less gradually and more forcefully, making the transition to electrification, which is where we're going. So in the future, that's where we'll get our energy. Our energy will be electricity to start with, rather than chemical energy for the most part. The bad is that we're seeing the last bag of tricks from the fossil fuel industry on its way out, and they're selling some distractions in the form of carbon capture and storage and hydrogen. The ugly is basically the lies, I guess, for lack of a better word, that are being used to pitch some of these non-solutions, which are really intended just to distract and delay us from our journey towards electrification. And the absurd are just the number of things that have been put forward, and some of them are garnering investment money that make absolutely no sense, that can be debunked in 5 minutes with a working brain and a calculator and Google and knowledge of some conservation equations. As an example, the first one that pops into mind is direct air capture for carbon capture and storage. So it's like the idiot cousin of carbon capture and storage from fossil fuel burning. Why capture it at 4% at 40,000 ppm from a stack when you can capture it from the atmosphere at 400 ppm?
No, but millions of dollars are put in those kind of ideas.
Absolutely.
I mean, how is that? I mean, see, I'm not a technically competent guy, but you think
sure, I can explain it. It's really easy. So you listen to the IPCC and various other bodies that are telling us that if we really want to deal with climate change, we have to do two things. First of all, we have to stop making fossil CO2 emissions in net terms to the atmosphere. We have to get to net zero, if you will. The net part being very very questionable. And then we have to actually pull some of the CO2 out of the atmosphere that we put in past, because nature won't do it fast enough on its own.
Right.
And so because they say those things, people think, oh, well, all of the pathways include negative carbon emission technologies that are pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. So therefore, we have to use the brute force and ignorance method of actually trying to capture CO2 from the air and capture it as CO2 and then bury it or do whatever. It's simple-minded thinking. It's just like the hydrogen, what do we burn aside from fossils? Well, of course, we burn hydrogen. What do we make hydrogen from? Fossils. So
No, but are you
the
saying that this hydrogen-powered vehicle is just a hopium from your definition, if I can borrow that?
100%, 100%,
But
yes.
but how do you say that?
Hydrogen,
See, BMW, of course, they have sold only
nope,
300 or 400 cars, but
yep.
7 years with a hydrogen
No,
powered.
no, no, since the 1980s. You see,
Yeah,
you're lacking the
no, but
history.
now,
They've been
now,
working on
now, oh,
hydrogen since they've been working on hydrogen since the 1980s.
no,
It's
but they're
resulted
selling
in
only for the
nothing.
last 7 years, right? The sales
No,
have happened for the last 7 years.
yeah, and how many did they sell? A few
No, that
compliance
is true.
cars.
400. That's true.
Yeah, a
But
few
what they're
compliance
saying
cars.
is that they are going to do huge numbers, and
No, they're not.
Toyota,
No, they
Hyundai,
are absolutely not. They're not. They're not. They
they're
haven't,
not.
and they are not. And the reasons
No,
are really straightforward. You compare them against what they compete against in the marketplace. Okay. In the 1980s, the alternative was engines or fuel cell hydrogen cars. And under those circumstances, maybe you could make some argument for hydrogen, derived from wind and solar or nuclear or hydroelectricity, but the electric vehicle has come along. And by the way, a fuel cell vehicle with a hydrogen fuel cell in it is an electric vehicle. It has every component in it that an electric vehicle has. On top of it, it has a fuel cell and hydrogen tanks and humidifiers and all this other stuff. So the notion that hydrogen cars will compete against battery electric cars is just not people. Anyone who's making that argument hasn't actually looked at the data.
no.
You
What
know,
about Honda, Hyundai, Honda, Toyota?
there are two proponents out there that are left. There's Hyundai and there's
Yeah.
Toyota. That's it. Honda had its Clarity fuel cell. They abandoned that project. That project's deader than a doornail. The Germans, most of them have abandoned their projects, or they're
Oh,
nursing it along.
they're recently one of them announced a new effort towards uh,
Yeah, new effort.
hydrogen.
Yeah, I mean, the thing
They
is,
want to
there's
compete with
lots of
Toyota. That's what it said.
announcements. There's lots of announcements. There's lots of fanfare. There's lots of, there's some investor meeting coming up, and they have to show something new to get people excited to make the share value go up a little bit, so the management
Right.
can make a few,
Yeah. Okay. But okay,
you know,
let's talk only about Toyota. Why Toyota? I mean, how is it?
uh,
I mean, they
very,
say that they
very
have they have
simple.
perfected it. They have been running it for a very long time, but now they have perfected it, and they're going with so the economy model car in hydrogen.
Yeah, good luck. So the here's the reality of the situation. First of all, you have to understand what Japan is. Japan is a big nation with very energy hungry population that imports all of its energy.
Right.
Substantially all of its energy comes to them on ships. Okay, they have a little hydropower. They have a little bit of wind, a little bit of solar. They have a little nuclear, but they don't have their own uranium. So
They stopped their
Japanese,
nuclear power plant
well, they
as well, right?
stopped it, and now they're reopening reactors. So
Oh,
they Japan's a complicated place, but here's the thing that you need to understand. They import all of their energy, and they like to import it on ships, okay? Because they don't like the nearest land neighbors very much. And as a consequence, and who's their absolute nearest land neighbor? It's South Korea, which is the same deal. It's in exactly the same situation. They import all of their energy. Those countries post decarbonization are in big trouble. Okay, they're in big trouble. They don't have enough land mass to collect enough renewable energy to satisfy the needs of their massive heavy industry. And their economic competitors are going to be using electricity directly that they can make themselves. So the trouble for Japan and South Korea is they want to replace the fossil fuel paradigm with something else that they can import on ships. And they think hydrogen is going to be that thing. And of course, it can't be hydrogen because hydrogen itself is very difficult to move and store. So now they're talking about ammonia and methanol and liquid organic hydrogen carriers. And I won't bore the audience with all of the ridiculousness, but the point is that there's no way that this future has a future. There is no new LNG in a decarbonized future. The new LNG is HVDC cables, high voltage DC cables, brought from places that have renewable electricity in large quantity to places that don't have it. That's the new LNG. There's no new chemical that people are
All
going to
right.
import that will
Well,
provide energy at anything
recently
close
the
to a reasonable price.
recently the
Because of that,
Toyota, yeah,
because of this fact, because the Japanese don't have enough electricity and know they need to import energy in a chemical form or think that they do, they have bet on hydrogen, and it serves two purposes. Number one, it delays electrification because they know, even though they had Toyota had the big lead with the Prius,
right,
the hybrid,
the hybrid
that,
car.
yeah, that lead is gone. It's completely evaporated. Tesla has lapped them, has been around the track 3 or 4 times, and they're still sitting at the starting line. And
Mhm.
yeah, so they know that they need to delay the transition to electric because in that battle others are winning and they're losing. And the second thing is that they need to do what's consistent with Japanese government policy, which is pointing towards this future of energy imports in another chemical form. Because in a decarbonized future where there are no energy imports in a chemical form, Japan's major industry is toast. So here's what's going on. Japan's not decarbonizing. They need to pretend to decarbonize in a way that seems credible to the rest of the world. And hydrogen serves that purpose perfectly. But when you look at two cars, okay, the battery electric car and the hydrogen car, you compare them side to side. You can pick, in fact, you don't have to, it's very easy to do this. You can pick two cars that exist today that you can buy, although the hydrogen one is a little difficult to buy. The Toyota Mirai and the Tesla Model 3 rear-wheel drive long-range version. Now, when you compare those two cars, the Mirai Mark One, they made a Mark Two recently. They shoved another hydrogen tank in it and gave it a little bit more range at the cost of more interior space. But anyway, the Mark One and the Model 3 long range version, they got about the same mileage. In fact, the Model 3 went a little further, 330 miles instead of 312 miles, something like that. So very close to the same range. But here's how it stacks up. The battery, the Mirai, the hydrogen car costs more, weighs more, uses 3.2 times as much energy, costs 5 times as much per mile driven. Okay, accelerates half as fast. But what's the benefit? You can refuel it faster. Well, the Model 3 you can recharge in 20 minutes. The hydrogen car you can recharge in 5 minutes, but only
Yeah,
if there's a
that's what they
hydrogen
say.
station.
And
Only if
only
there's a
thing that
hydrogen
it
station
throws out
somewhere
is
near you.
water. Pure water is what I mean.
Oh
That's
yeah, yeah. It's the meme of it is lovely, but the devil is hiding in the details, and he's not hiding. He's waving his pitchfork at you with one hand, and he's making rude
okay.
gestures to you with the other one.
Well, the new one, what they're talking about, they say it is actually lighter. It's not as heavy.
Well, it might be lighter, but it's not lighter than the battery equivalent.
Oh, they actually say it's lighter than the battery. But anyway,
Well, look at
but at the same breath,
people
he
have been
said that they
making
will
this
not.
argument for years, and they
No, but they
say
said
all
they will
kinds of
not
stuff.
stop making electric car or the hybrid cars. They will keep up with both of them because
Yeah,
they
yeah,
say that
because
we'll
what are
go
they
with
really trying to
customers'
do?
needs. We don't want to stop what the customer needs,
They,
but we believe this is the future. That's the CEO's
they,
thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so they changed CEOs recently.
Oh,
Okay,
that's true. Yeah.
and the hydrogen
And this is the new
and
CEO who made this statement.
well, the new CEO is going to try his best to follow the policy of the old one. Remember, this is Japan, and in
Mm.
Japan, there's this thing that they call face, and losing face is a very difficult thing, right? So if someone has to admit that they're wrong, it's very humiliating. And so there's a lot of policy that continues in the same direction in Japan as it did before, because if it changed, someone would lose face. And the reality about hydrogen for cars is that it's been superseded by a superior technology. And there is no value proposition for something that costs 5 times as much per mile driven and costs more per vehicle than the alternative that does the same basic job.
Well, in India, uh, the government of India, in fact, the Minister of Transportation, flagged off a bus which is powered by hydrogen. In fact, Tata
Oh yeah,
Motors uh,
yeah. Hey,
into
there
it.
are hydrogen buses. There are a handful of hydrogen buses in the world. There are
Right.
tens of thousands of battery electric buses already.
No, that's
As
true.
far as
But
cars are concerned, there might be 10,000 fuel cell cars in the world, and we're selling, you know, 5, 7 million electric vehicles per year.
no, that's
When you do
true.
a graph of the two side by side, on the same scale, the fuel cell vehicles, you can't even see the line. There's no line there. The thing,
No, that is true. That's the current
yeah,
scenario
yeah.
clearly. But if you
Let,
look at
let
the
me
same
explain
way,
to you
right? For
technically. Let me explain to you technically
yeah,
why hydrogen is a bad fuel. First of all, the energy density per unit mass, the amount of energy you get per kilogram, is very good. The problem is hydrogen is too big. Its density per unit volume, energy density per unit volume, is not good at all.
mm,
And the problem is that in order to compress it and make it smaller, either to make it a compressed gas at 700 bar, or a liquid at 24 degrees above absolute zero, takes a tremendous amount of energy. And even when you're done, a liquid, it's 71 kilograms per cubic meter, compared to water, which is 1,000, or gasoline, which is 800. The energy density per unit volume is absurdly low. On top of it, you have to use a fuel cell. And if you want a practical fuel cell for a vehicle, that means that you need platinum group metals in it. And unlike the components of lithium ion battery, platinum group metals are actually rare. They're actually rare. There are a handful of places in the world where there are mineable concentrations of platinum group metals.
mm,
So the platinum group metals are just a component of the fuel cell. The fuel cell is expensive, but not just because of the platinum group metals. It's expensive for a whole variety of reasons. And another thing that people don't realize is that fuel cells don't last forever either. They degrade just like batteries. So
no,
after a time, you need to
but the
replace it.
argument is that at least it is 2 to 3 times longer than uh, these batteries,
It's
right? Which is
it's
like
not.
at least.
It's not. It's not. That's not
Oh,
true.
okay.
I know the actual operating hours, lifetimes expectancies of fuel cell vehicles, and they're nowhere near the same. And besides, the fuel cell vehicle has a battery. It
Right,
has its own battery. It needs it
right,
because it needs it for startup and it needs it for energy management. Otherwise, it couldn't take
right,
advantage of regenerative braking. So
right.
that battery is going to have the same kind of issue as the battery in the larger vehicle, except worse, because from an energy management perspective, it's being tasked in a much more dramatic way. The current rates, the rates at which it needs to be charged and discharged, are much more violent, much higher than those when you have a big battery that's intended as a storage battery. So the notion that hydrogen will be used as a transport fuel, honestly, it does not stand up to intellectual rigor. It doesn't stand up to analysis. The value proposition is extremely questionable. And without the market of cars, the notion that fuel cells would get cheaper and cheaper because we would make more of them and we would learn each time, this is this thing they call Wright's Law. There's not enough Wright's Law doublings available if you just use fuel cells in trucks and buses in order to get them cheap enough to be competitive. Because let me tell you, they're not cheap enough to be competitive now. They're ridiculously expensive. And to make them cheaper would require people to buy large numbers of the very expensive ones. first in order for them to get cheaper and cheaper each time. There's no analogous market to what there was with the lithium-ion battery. With the lithium-ion battery, there were cell phone makers that were happy to pay $3,000 per kilowatt for the battery that made their cell phone last longer than their competitors, right? And that gave them a large number of doublings. And then once they got cheap enough, they got into laptop computers, and then into power tools, and now in cars, and now grid storage. I mean, the path for battery improvement continues. And the most recent one, the one that should have, if the hydrogen people had any reason to fear before, they should be quaking in their boots now, is the sodium-ion battery. And the sodium-ion battery, there are a number of components, but CATL in China, Contemporary Amperex Technologies, they have announced a sodium-ion battery that is basically the same in performance as lithium iron phosphate batteries were about a decade ago. And a decade ago, I built an electric car with lithium iron phosphate batteries. So there's no question that if CATL are not lying, and they could be lying, but if they're not lying, then they've got a battery that contains nothing that isn't abundant on Earth. The metal, the electrolyte, the anode, the cathode, even the metal foils that the anode and cathode are coated on, they're all Earth abundant materials. I mean, salt, aluminum. You could never mine the Earth out of aluminum. There's no way. The Earth is such a high percentage aluminum, and the cathode is an iron cyanide, or an iron ferricyanate material, Prussian white material that's been lithiated, and the anode. So the cathode is the Prussian white material. The anode is hard carbon, which we can get from biomass. Like, there's no question. Sodium-ion batteries, I think their big opportunity isn't in mobility. I think it's in grid storage. But the opportunity to get batteries that cost, in the future, maybe as little as somewhere between $10 and $30 a kilowatt hour is really there now. It's absolutely possible.
But see, don't you think we have a huge challenge in keeping up with the afterlife of batteries?
Nope, because unlike a lot of people in this industry, I've actually been involved in projects that recovered, metals like lithium, nickel, and copper, and cobalt from their native ores. Okay. And I can tell you authoritatively, on the basis of my experience, that a lithium-ion battery is a better ore for the metals that it contains than any native ore you can find on Earth. So the problem with lithium-ion batteries is not the big ones in cars or grid storage. The problem with lithium-ion batteries is the billions of them glued into little things like your earbuds, right? And the problem there is that the battery itself is a small fraction of the mass of the thing. And so you need to have a deposit return system in order to recover those goods. Otherwise, people just throw them away in the garbage and they end up at the landfill. And the problem with batteries in the landfill is the possibility of causing fires. Okay.
And also heavy metal poisoning, right? As it goes into the underground water.
When you look at lithium-ion batteries, the risk of groundwater contamination is actually fairly low. It's not zero, but it's fairly low. You're thinking maybe more of nickel cadmium batteries, where cadmium is extremely toxic. Lead acid batteries, where we already recover something like 97% of them and recycle them because of the toxicity, and because we also put in place a core charge. When if I buy a lead acid battery, I pay a certain number of dollars today on top of the cost of the battery. And then when the battery is dead, I bring it back and I get that money back. And that way the batteries are returned. So we need to do the same with the small lithium-ion batteries. The ones in cars, the ones in grid storage, they're worth money.
Do you think the same is possible?
No, they're worth money. They're not Schrodinger's batteries, right? It's not that they are expensive because they contain expensive metals like nickel and copper and cobalt and the like, and yet not worth recycling. You see how those two things can't be true at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, the notion, what we're running into here is nirvana fallacy argument. Okay, so when people compare a new technology against what came before, there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. The right way is to compare honestly the new technology with what it replaces. The wrong way is to compare the new technology against perfection that exists only in nirvana. Okay? And so this nirvana fallacy argument is very popular. People will say, well, lithium-ion batteries require cobalt. Cobalt comes from a bad country. That's a basket case and dysfunctional. Very poor people live there. And so children are mining cobalt. So batteries are no good, right? And
Isn't
then you
there a
go,
partial truth to it?
well, yeah,
Pa-
it's not a it's not a lie. It's a
yeah.
myth. Okay. So the reality of the situation about batteries is they require mining, just like everything that isn't
Correct.
grown requires
Correct.
mining. But some numbers are instructive. Uh, every year we burn about 8,000 megatons of coal. Okay. And every year we mine about 22 megatons of copper and about 0.1 megatons of lithium. And the thing about the coal is when you burn it, it's gone. You have to mine it again. With the copper and the lithium, at least you get another kick at the can if you want. You can recycle it. And copper, I mean, it's very valuable for recycling.
No, but
People recycle
what percentage can be recovered as of
it.
today's
How
technology
much money do you
readiness?
have? How much is it worth? An arbitrary percentage. I mean, as an example, the fuel cell guys say, well, yeah, we can get 99% of the platinum back from the fuel cell. Yeah, because it's worth $1,000 a troy ounce. It's worth hundreds of dollars a gram. you know
All right.
so if the thing is worth a lot, it's worth putting a lot of energy in order to recover it. If it's not worth a lot, it's not worth a lot of energy to recover it, because the stuff from nature comes to you at a lower cost. So there's an economics at work there, and you run the numbers. And with lithium, the likely outcome is it's not going to be worth spending too much effort to recover it, because lithium is
No,
actually abundant. Okay, whereas with nickel and cobalt, the ore quantities for nickel are very high, but the ore
well,
grades are
we
low.
have few
And cobalt,
situations
the
here, right?
problem, yeah, cobalt, the problem is not that there isn't cobalt around. The problem is we know where it is, and it happens to be in the wrong country. And so what the battery industry did is they said, okay, no more cobalt. So last year, Tesla, 50% of their batteries are lithium iron phosphate. They contain no cobalt at all. They just sidestepped the issue by getting rid of the chemistry that was causing the nirvana fallacy argument. So you see, the difference between fossil fuels and the renewable technologies is that renewable technologies, they're always substitutions. If you're worried about rare earth, lanthanide metals used in making magnets, in military applications, you're stuck. There's nothing else to use. You have to use the magnet. But if you want to build a wind turbine, or you want to build an electric car, you can substitute the magnet with coils of wire. The Tesla Model S, as an example, had an induction motor in it, no magnets in it. So there's always a substitution that can be made. And the industry is constantly running the numbers and going, supply chain doesn't look good here. It's going to take some time for these guys to build the mines necessary to build the production. We see the price is going to go up. So let's find an alternative to that. So they find an alternative. And this is how it's done. It's how it's always been done. And in fact, there have been many situations in the past where people have needed something, and then new technology came along, and that old thing that we needed is no longer needed. Perfect example is strontium. So strontium is one of the metals in the group with calcium and magnesium. And it used to be used a lot in color television sets. It was used as an absorber for X-rays on the front surface. And we don't make those X-ray type, those tube type TVs
Tube
anymore.
TVs, yeah.
Yeah. So we don't need strontium anymore. It had a small market in making fireworks red color, and road flares and this kind of thing. It's still used for that, but the market has dropped by a factor of 10 from what it used to be when we were making TVs. So this happens with materials all the time. Things come into vogue. I mean, lithium, we didn't have much use for it, and then we invented the lithium ion battery, and now we need lots of it, right? But if the price gets too high, then people are going to switch to sodium or magnesium or aluminum, or you can do this chemistry with a bunch of different.
You don't think there is any afterlife issue from a battery, assuming if it's
they're valuable for
leads
recycling.
to more landfill, then, right? I mean, if you are not taking out because
they're valuable for recycling. So why would you landfill them?
So even for recycling, how much of it can be recycled, right? That is still an economic
question,
right?
The battery metals, well over 90% with ease, without difficulty. The current collector foils, 99%, no problem. Okay, the aluminum and the copper, and the cobalt and the nickel and the like, no difficulty getting over 90%. And the lithium, you can get over 90%, but the question is, will it be worth bothering to get over 90%?
No, but how many such plants are there across the globe also, right?
Because, how many dead batteries are there so far? Basically, batteries, well, there aren't many. And the reason there aren't
many, but when they come about also,
they're lasting longer than people expect. And because they're lasting longer than people expect, what's happening is the ones that come out of crashed cars are going into second life applications.
See, in India, we have one center which is still getting ready. One more is coming up, I heard recently. So there, at least by next year, we will have 2 plants where they will be repurposing of batteries, like what you said, right? From a bigger car to, we have a big market for electric bikes in India.
Yeah.
So they are talking about repurposing the batteries from the cars to the bikes.
So battery recycling, battery material recycling is already fairly substantially widespread practice in China, because there's battery scrap that's generated in the making of batteries, and the batteries are being made in China.
No, but it's too expensive to send it to China, right? We need to have things done here. I mean, everywhere.
Sure. And that's not a problem. Once you have sufficient quantities of batteries to make plants of sufficient scale worth building to recycle them, what you'll see, well, what we're seeing right now is you're seeing 5, 6, 7 companies going after this market. And then you'll see a rationalization as all the marginal small operations die, because the bigger ones build bigger plants and their marginal economics improve. And eventually what you'll find is that there'll be some optimal number. And there's some clever companies that are working on doing partial processing, where they break down the basic components of the battery in lots of places, so you don't have to ship the battery very far. And then they do the processing to recover the battery grade materials from the partially processed raw material in a centralized plant, so they can get a good economy of scale. So, people are being smart about this stuff, and it's a business. It's like any other business. You make it, you need scale in order to make it profitable.
Yeah, an organic economic cycle will take care of it.
It's not a problem. Here's the thing. Electric vehicles are fundamentally different than many other things in the renewable energy transition, because they already offer their owner a lower total cost of ownership than what they replace. Okay, so if you drive your car, if your car is not a piece of jewelry, right? You actually drive it. You drive a lot of distance. You're paying a lot for gasoline or diesel right now. You can switch to electricity, and because of the greater efficiency, you drop your cost of operation for your vehicle, and the vehicle uses a lot of energy during its lifetime. And very
Mhm.
quickly, you can find that the extra capital that you paid to buy a battery electric vehicle pays you back in savings and operating costs. And
So
remember,
what do
no
you
oil.
think about the hybrid, assuming that, we have anyway fossil fuels available for at least another 200 years, as they say?
Well, if we're burning fossil fuels for the next 200 years, we will not have a habitable planet. So that's off the table.
No, not in
It,
the same manner, but hybrids as hybrid, right?
yeah, well, I've driven nothing but hybrids aside from the electric car that I built. I've driven nothing but hybrids since 2008. What percentage of the vehicle fleet is hybrids? Is it
Oh,
15%?
oh well, uh, but don't you see that can grow as big?
Yeah,
No?
sure. You can pass legislation and say all engines must be hybridized. I
Do
would
you
do
see
that
that
tomorrow
happening?
if I was in government. I would do that tomorrow. Is
No,
it
but do you
happening?
see
No,
that happening?
because of course not. Neither will the hybrids come. Okay. What's going to happen is instead of people taking the half step to a hybrid, which costs them more than the gasoline vehicle in order to save a little bit of money on gasoline, instead they'll take the full step to electric vehicles. And in places like the United States, in Europe, in Canada, this transition is happening already. I mean, it's
Mhm.
hard to get an electric vehicle. They're not producing them fast enough. People are making
Well,
that
it's
switch
it's
already.
yeah, it's same here in India, but yeah,
So,
it's
so the point is that this is a rare occasion where doing the right thing for the environment also saves you money. Okay, the
right,
most of the time, doing the right thing for the environment costs you more money. So
right.
in cases where doing the right thing for the environment saves you money, it's if you have the money, you're beholden to do it, right? And electric
Right.
vehicles, there's no question about it. Let me give you an example. Anyone who can see the video will see this funny thing hanging from the ceiling in the background, this orange colored thing with a headlight on it. And that's actually the hood of my 1975 Triumph Spitfire.
Wow.
And
Okay.
my son and I converted that to an electric car in 2014.
Oh, I
And
read that blog of yours about it. Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
drove it back and forth to work for 4 years. And then one day when I was driving home, a big pickup truck changed lanes into me and destroyed the car. Now, fortunately, I wasn't hurt and the electric stuff was all fine. So I took it out of that car and put it into another car, into a 1973 TR6 that I'm driving around now. But where I was going with this is that this was a beautiful example where you could do direct comparisons, right? So I drove that Spitfire as a gasoline car, and I knew what its fuel economy was. I converted it to electric. So identical car, same car, different drivetrain. That car reduced the greenhouse gas emissions from my drive to work and back by 97%. 97%. Because Ontario has wonderful electricity, mostly nuclear and hydro, and about as much wind as gas, and no coal since 2013. So the nice thing about that conversion was not only was that a really fun car and a beautiful car, very unique, right? It reduced my greenhouse gas emissions for my commute compared to the same car by 97%. It
Wow.
paid back the extra emissions associated with the battery in less than 1 year.
What about the
Okay.
cost of conversion?
Oh, you would never convert a car unless you were in love with it. It's like asking, would you
It's
ever build a
probably
car
better
for?
to buy a new car itself, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But at the time, my choice was to buy a Nissan Leaf for $40,000, or to
Mm.
spend 20,000 on learning how to do a conversion and having a car that no one else had. Right. So for
Well,
me, it
tell me
was a
something. Do
no
you
brainer.
do you see people developing a convertible kit?
No, I do
You don't
not,
see that
because
happening?
it's not good economics to do that.
Oh,
Now,
well, in India, we have quite a few startups building convertible kits, which are in the
yeah,
market, not for the cars, for the two-wheelers.
yes. Now, okay, so this is the thing that a lot of people don't understand, and talking to somebody from India will get this automatically. People think right away of cars in in uh, places like North America and Europe and so on, right away people are thinking of cars, and they're not thinking about 2 and 3 wheelers. And yet, 2 and 3 wheelers in Asia
See,
and the
I'm
Far
from
East,
Bangalore. We have
yeah,
highest number of two-wheelers in the world.
there you go. Of course, and it's these vehicles, the electrification of these vehicles, that are making the biggest impact on the amount of petroleum distillates demand in the world.
Right. In fact, the convertible
Seriously,
kits are working. There is a cost element is not as good a proposition yet, but
yep,
what it's providing is that you get an additional 5-year life certificate. An
yep,
average life certificate for a vehicle here is 15 years. So
okay,
if you're a 10-year-old vehicle, two-wheeler, and
yep.
you convert it, you make it electric with the kit, you get an additional 5 years of life certificate. So you can run
See,
for
there
another
you
10
go.
years.
Yeah, so it's a regulatory driver, right? With a car, these drivers are harder to make sense of, and the trouble with cars is the cost of those replacement parts. Trying to build a car, if the math that people do all the time here is, my car needs a new engine. Is it
Mm-hmm.
worth to replace the engine in the car, or should I just scrap the car and get another car? And when you look at the cost, it's the cost of the engine, but it's also the cost of the labor to pull the engine, put another engine in. It's not a small amount of labor. And yeah, I understand the labor dynamics are different in India. I see lots of YouTube videos of the very creative repair and replacement work that
Yeah.
happens in India. That people are working in small shops doing this kind of thing, and they can get great economy because of the nature of the economy there. But here in Canada, the cost to replace an engine is prohibitive. Your car had better be worth a lot of money for you to be thinking about replacing the engine, if the engine itself is actually beyond repair. It doesn't just need a rebuild or something. And the same would be true to replace the entire drivetrain, put an electric drivetrain in it. It's going to be very, very expensive. So it better be a car that you really absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
So an example of such cars that might make sense to convert would be things like Porsche Boxsters, as an example. They had bad engines. The engines blew up all the time, and this is a very expensive car and very prestigious, if you will. And so to convert such a car, it might be worth the money, right? But you're not going to take your
I,
Toyota
I
Yaris,
don't know. Probably in
and
India, 100. I don't know if they can sell only 100 or 200 cars in a year in India. So
well, you see, yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Probably the same here. Uh, maybe 500, but the point is that you can't build a business on such a small margin,
yeah,
right?
it's too
There are a few
small.
people that are making kits to convert old minis, those British minis, and also
Okay.
uh,
What kind of price points are they
Volkswagen
at?
Bugs and Volkswagen vans. In the United States and
Right.
California, there's businesses that are making conversions of those,
Okay.
but it's
How
a
much
small
does it
business.
cost?
Too much money to make sense. Like, I mean, it's not a way to save money. It's a way for nostalgia. And
No,
it's the
will
same.
numbers make a difference? That's what I'm just trying to understand. If because
Well,
India
there
means
aren't
numbers.
enough Beetles or Minis or cars like that out there. And if you're not going to make,
No, no. I
you're
mean,
not going
it
to be
need not be for
converting
Beatles or Bugs or any of
you're
it. See,
not
in
going to
India,
convert Toyota Yaris's or Nissan Micras or run of the mill car, or Ford F-150 pickup trucks. You're not going to convert
mm,
those to electric anytime soon. It just doesn't make any sense at all to do it economically. The body, the roller, the part of the car without the drivetrain in it is not worth enough to make
okay,
it worth
okay,
the bother. That's my opinion. I mean, I can be
yeah.
proven wrong, but I think everybody that does a conversion thinks for a minute, oh, I'm going to do this for a living now, because it's really fun. And then they are confronted by the hard economics of
Oh,
economic.
well, the reason is that in India, two-wheeler, it's not that it is taken off, it's on an explosion or any sorts, but there are a lot of startups coming in. They've started selling. Other day I was at a review. They had sold about 150 kids, which is too small, but it's good for a startup.
Sure,
You
sure. And
started selling,
the
right? It's not
the
free
thing
run.
that seems to make a lot of sense is electric bikes, electric motorcycles with battery swapping stations and mobility as a service. So you never own the battery, you just rent it.
That's happening as well. That's happening
Yeah,
as well.
Gogoro is one example of a company like that that's really got a good business model and is taking off and doing some interesting things. And those
Mhm.
sorts of opportunities, I think, will expand and grow and get more and more creative because again, the value proposition there exists even without the carbon tax,
Right, right. No,
right?
but the
The
cost
carbon
is
tax is
still a
only going to make
factor.
this all sweeter, it's going to make it
Uh,
better.
right, right. Yeah, maybe some things like that will have to come in to amplify this whole effort. But what exactly is this Hydrogen Science Coalition?
Okay, so the Hydrogen Science Coalition was born out of the frustration of myself and a number of other engineers and scientists and academics who were tired of watching all of this hyperbole being spread by interested parties, businesses that profit either from hydrogen itself or from the attempt to make hydrogen into a decarbonization solution, whether that attempt fails or succeeds. Okay, we got tired of listening to all of this
But
stuff.
have you got years of Canadian government for that argument?
Well, we're working on it, but the point is that this organization, this group of financially disinterested people who don't earn their money from hydrogen or from hydrogen's alternatives, formed together an organization. It's not for profit, and in fact, it doesn't even have any revenue. It doesn't, collect grants from government in order to hire employees and do this sort of thing. It has a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of money from a foundation that helps us have a website and some support with communications. But otherwise, it's just this group of people who provide information when they're asked. So, in response to public consultation requests from government, from media, journalists, and so on. We provide a science-based opinion about hydrogen and where it makes sense in decarbonization and where it doesn't.
For no cost?
Yeah, we do it pro bono. And the reason that we're
Wow.
doing this is we want to make sure that people understand hydrogen does have a role in decarbonization. And you know what the role is? We have to decarbonize hydrogen. Hydrogen itself, hydrogen itself is a problem of decarbonization bigger than the whole aviation industry.
Mm.
There are people that are surprised by it. They don't understand. They think, hydrogen is we can make it from electricity. Well, you can, but we don't. We make all the hydrogen in the world, 99% of it, we make from fossils without carbon capture. Okay.
No, but that's
And
a
we use
byproduct,
it.
right, in the process of their hydrocarbon. I mean,
No,
basically.
no, no. We make it on purpose from natural gas and coal for the purpose of making other chemicals. That's what we use
Mhm.
hydrogen for today. We use it, for instance, to make ammonia. And from ammonia,
Right.
we make nitrate and urea. And that's feeding half the people and their food animals on Earth right now. Okay.
See,
That's 40 million tons of hydrogen that we make every year that we need to make in the future. And right now, we're making it from coal and natural gas with no carbon capture. So obviously, if we think we can make some hydrogen from electricity and water, we have to use it to replace that before we think about wasting it as a fuel, burning it, running vehicles or whatever, or making heat. This is crazy,
see
right?
now, how would you, as a Hydrogen Science Coalition, make a case in India to the Indian transport minister who's
Re-
actually putting his weight behind hydrogen
Really
vehicles?
easy, really, really easy. So if you look at India, India needs to decarbonize its grid. Now, you were saying in the past episode that India is working on it, and that's fantastic. I encourage them.
It is, yeah.
Okay, but India still makes a lot of electricity by burning coal.
Less than 50%, but yes, it is significant
Oh,
and it is
yeah,
going
still
down.
50,
It will,
still 50, still 50%, right?
yeah.
So that's your priority. get yourself off coal, okay? And once you got yourself off coal, then worry about having excess electricity lying around that you can use to make things like hydrogen.
Oh
Don't
well.
put the cart before the horse.
Oh well. Problem is they're approached as two independent efforts. So there is an effort, there is a plan which will
Yep.
take another 20 years. I think
Mm-hmm.
India is officially made a commitment to go carbon neutral by 2070. So
Mm-hmm.
we're actually talking about another 47 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so
Not anywhere fast enough, but the reality of the situation is that there is no business case and there's no environmental case for wasting hydrogen as a fuel. There are a few niche applications where it might make sense, but by and large, most of this notion of hydrogen being pushed as a fuel and this notion of a hydrogen economy is predicated on simple-minded fuel substitution thinking. When you look at it in detail, it does not make any sense. It's just a way to waste electricity in large quantities in order to replace what we're used to. And there are smarter ways to go about doing it. You have to ask the right question. Okay. If you ask the question, we can't burn fossils, what else can we burn? You're already wrong.
right,
The question you have to ask is, we can't burn fossils anymore. How do we move people around? How do we have homes that are heated and cooled properly? How do we get food in quantity and variety that's healthy? You have to answer those questions you have to ask the right questions and then answer those. And the answer to those questions, when we're honest, is almost never burn hydrogen as a fuel.
right.
Because
Well,
hydrogen is derived from energy. It's derived from another form of energy. So you're just involving a middleman for some reason, and it makes no sense.
no, but don't you think it's the same argument even to make a PV cell, right? Even photovoltaic cell to manufacture is made using energy, and which is
Nope,
coming.
no, no, no. Because when you look at a PV cell, what you can find good, disinterested third party life cycle analyses that are done. And they'll look at how many kilowatt hours that PV cell will make over its lifetime and how many kilowatt hours of energy it took to make it. And they'll take the ratio and they find out that, in fact, the PV cell is better in terms of energy return per unit of energy invested than oil is. Okay.
See,
A
what I
decade
what I
ago, a
yeah,
decade ago, this was not true, and today it's true. The
how
marginal
much? What?
barrel of oil, the
Yeah,
marginal barrel of oil takes a lot of energy to find,
what's the number?
to
What's the
produce,
ratio?
and refine. Well, there's no one number. It depends on where
Okay,
in the world and what kind of
yeah,
oil.
I guess.
But
Yeah,
in
but
the old days, oil was 30, and it's not 30 anymore. Believe me.
well,
It's less than 10.
the
And
see
solar
the
panels are better than the marginal barrel of oil.
last time I
So
was checking, see, solar panels, it used to take, like, let's say the energy it takes to make 1 square foot of solar panel.
mhm.
The same energy, if the same square foot of solar panel has to generate the energy it took to manufacture it, it was around 8 to 10 years. No, it was even 12 years earlier, and then came down to 8 to 10 years. And
Yeah,
most
and
recent effort is
now it's
come down to some 4.7 years, right?
yeah, it's much
So
less than that. It's much less
see,
than that
most of
already.
it that is right now running in India, perhaps I would give it around 8 years, because this technology of 4.7 years is something very recent as last year. So okay,
It's
let's
much
even if you
better
go
than
with
that
that,
now. And the other
better
thing
than
is
that.
you can't. Yeah, it's much better
So
than
if you
than
have to
four.
do the same kind of a measure, is there any measure for hydrogen on the same scale?
Yeah, hydrogen is just take whatever you were doing before and throw away an extra third of the energy or more.
Oh,
Okay. Oh yeah,
okay.
throw away at least another 30%. Okay.
Oh, that's
But
because of
let's
you loss of.
Yeah. Well, no, we have to let's go back to your PV example. So people simple-mindedly do these calculations. They look at how many joules of electricity the thing makes and how many joules of heat that it took to do the carbothermic reduction of silicon or whatever. And they compare and they say, oh, look, the solar panel ER over EI is not very good. But they'd committed the second sin of thermodynamics because the solar panel is making electricity and it's taking heat energy to make it. And they're not worth the same. It's comparing American dollars and Jamaican dollars, like we were talking about last time. Okay. So when you look at the exergy, exergy is the amount that of a given amount of energy that can be converted into work, into mechanical energy or electricity or the like. Okay.
Right.
So if
Right.
you look at the exergy return per unit exergy invested in solar panels and wind turbines, they blow oil out of the water. Okay. They're way better because they're making electricity, they're not just making heat. Okay. Chemical energy is a proxy for heat. So let's look at now hydrogen. We're going to start with electricity. We're going to use it to break water apart to make hydrogen and oxygen. What have we done? We've taken work and we've converted it to heat. And not only did we convert work to heat, we converted work to heat with losses, with a 30% loss, best case. Okay. So we took a giant step backwards. Now we got to transport it and store it, which is hard for hydrogen because it's big. And then we got to convert it back to electricity again or work again in a fuel cell or a turbine or something, right? By the time you do all those steps, you buy 3 kilowatt hours, you get one back. It's a terrible battery. It's a terrible battery. It's the worst battery. I mean, well, you can make it worse. You can convert the hydrogen to ammonia and then do all those things and then convert the ammonia to hydrogen. You can get worse, believe me. You can, there are, imagination is infinite on how much you can make it worse, but you can't fix it. Okay. It's fundamentally a bad battery. And as a consequence, when you compare it against a battery, it always loses.
Tell me, Paul, what do you basically do to stay relevant and keep yourself updated? I mean, what do you do? I mean,
So I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. And the reason I spend time on LinkedIn is that it's supposed to be a professional environment, meaning people are there in a professional capacity, largely, as opposed to just talking to their friends, right? And the nice thing about LinkedIn is LinkedIn allows you to publish articles and then go back and edit them when things change. So what I do is I will publish an article and I'll say, here, this is my thinking today on this topic, whatever it is. And then a knowledgeable group of people, and I have large number, thousands and thousands of followers now, that group of people will read it. And some of them are very smart and very skeptical people. And they'll say, hey, you said this. I don't think it's right. Here's the reference. I think maybe you did that calculation wrong. And then I'll go back and, oh, my goodness, yeah, Dave Smith found I made a math error. Oh, I have to go back and correct it. And I go back and correct it. And I thank Dave, right? And the articles get better and better. And then people will come along and say, oh, your argument is
don't
flawed in this.
you know, I was thinking maybe you'll say that you work with some university research lab or some
Oh, I'm doing
public
look,
research
I'm
lab.
doing a million things, and a lot of them I can't
Okay.
talk about because
Oh,
again,
you also
I'm
do
I'm
work with
working in
some research
technology
labs and
development. I'm
okay.
working in technology development, and as a
That's
consequence, I'm
as a
up.
consulting engagement, right? That's your business part of it.
Yeah, and as a private citizen in a
Or do
pro
you also
bono.
spend time in any academic research effort with any of these institutions? And just
I'm involved in writing a peer-reviewed paper right now.
okay.
But again, largely what I'm doing, is focused on two areas. One of them is my consulting work, which is working with the people that are really the leaders in the decarbonization effort all over the world, both in terms of people developing new technology and people who want to invest in new technology.
Can you take names as a company? Who are the guys who are doing things in the decarbonization space, doing biggest
Well,
change
I mean,
towards that? Is there
I'm
any?
not gonna. I can't list my clients' names because usually a non-disclosure agreement involves
Right.
not mentioning who they are.
But any
So,
research institution who's working towards these things, anything that you can just point a finger at, okay, these are the guys who are doing some really amazing work on that?
well, I mean, the people that come to mind immediately are Jeff Don's group at out of Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia and Canada, who are world experts in developing lithium-ion battery technology and in finding out very rapidly how long a battery will last. They don't need to test a battery until it fails to know how long it'll take before it fails. This is a wonderful breakthrough, and it's Canadian innovation. The Jeff Don partnered with Tesla and with a number of other people, and I think actually Jeff is retiring from the group now, but the organization persists and continues its really excellent work. That's an example of a public institution that's doing work in this area and also supporting industry. There are lots of examples of, like the Argonne National Laboratory in the United States has this wonderful tool called the GREET model, which is used for LCA, life cycle cost analysis and impact analysis for various materials. They've done wonderful work there. National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States and CSIRO in Australia have done excellent work in relation to these things. And even though sometimes those organizations get infected by this hopium bug, and start talking a little bit too much about hydrogen as a decarbonization solution when it's really a decarbonization problem, you can still find the data in there. And the data is good data. They will take positions that are sometimes very politically unpopular and unpopular with the industry. That makes the industry quite upset. The data is in there and you can find it. And sometimes they're publishing the data, and yet they're big fans of this thing. Like CSIRO published a really good report about the energy cycle efficiency in relation to using ammonia as an energy carrier. And that work it's really quite good work. And a lot of optimistic assumptions in there and so on. You can forgive them for that, because in Australia, these guys are in love with the idea of becoming the world's green energy superpower, right? Exporter, and they're going to export everything to Japan and so on. But you go through the data and you find out, involve ammonia. Now, instead of buying 3 kilowatt hours and getting one back, now you buy between 5 and 10 kilowatt hours and get one back. Good business if you want to sell electricity. Bad business if you buy electricity.
What's your take on biofuels?
So when you look objectively at decarbonization, and I have a wonderful article that I've written. I think it's really quite good, but unfortunately, it's not read as well as some of my other articles, which are more critical of other things. They seem to be more popular. But this article is called "What Are the Energy Solutions?" And it lays out what I think the energy solutions are. And it says, look, these are just mine. I'm sure there are a million others that can be piled on top. Just think about it carefully and critically, and I'm sure you can come up with more. But the point here is that the thinking that people have about decarbonization is often, like I said before, arising from a fuel substitution perspective. And if you take that box off your head for a minute and you think about it in a more open-minded way, you will find that there are alternatives that make better sense, that are more straightforward and more efficient and more realistic. And having the notion that it's always a choice between A and B, it's not such a good thinking, because there might be C, D, E, and F out there that you also have to consider. And the market is really good about that when you provide them with a market incentive. So you put in place a carbon tax as an example, and all of a sudden, all the clever people will come out, now I can make this way, whereas in the old days we could, so.
No, but this argument in US, right, when they went heavy on biofuel, particularly corn being used for fuel, it started affecting on the food security as well.
Yes. Okay. So here's the thing about biofuels. We use them for the wrong things now. Okay. and we
Mhm.
implement them the wrong way. And this is kind of where I was going. In my What are the Energy Solutions paper, I talk about what we can electrify and what we can't. And what you hear all the time about hydrogen, as an example, is people saying, well, it's for the hard to decarbonize sectors, right?
Mhm.
And right away I go, well, that means there must be easy to decarbonize sectors. Why are we not working on those ones first, right?
Right.
But with the biofuels thing, really you need to focus them where we need liquid fuels. And there are only really three applications where we still need liquid fuels in the decarbonized future. Okay.
Mhm.
Number one is long distance aviation. Long
Right.
distance aviation, not feasible with hydrogen, not feasible with electric, not feasible with anything else. You're going to need liquid fuels for that.
Mhm.
Another one is, although there are options longer term, long distance ships. Long distance ships, you could make them work with batteries, but the payback on the batteries would just be way too long because they're not cycled frequently enough. So as a consequence, you need liquid fuels for ships. And that leaves you with one last one, and that's remote and rural transport. Okay. So let's say that you have to ship truckloads of goods to northern Canada to resupply some First Nations community up there. And the only time you can get there is the rest of the year you have to fly. But in the winter, everything is frozen, so you can drive on ice roads and drive up there. No one is going to use electric, no one's going to use hydrogen. Fuel logistics drive you to use only liquid fuel. The
You
three
you
applications.
you're saying that electric vehicle will manage everything else?
Yep,
Electric powered engines will manage everything
yep,
else?
yep. Everything: construction equipment, mining equipment, heavy transport, buses, inshore and nearshore shipping,
Heavy
all of
trucks,
it.
bus, everything.
Yep. Everything. Yeah, no question.
Well, okay. In India, government of India, once again, the minister I referred to earlier, the Minister for
Mhm.
Transportation, he is backing biofuels for. We have three-wheeled vehicles in India,
Yep,
right? For last mile transportation,
yep,
right? Maybe up to 1 ton vegetables moved from warehouse to the retail outlets and things like that,
yep,
right?
yep.
Smaller. So all those
They
three-wheel
have they
vehicles.
have all kinds of names in different places in the world. Rickshaws, tuk
Oh,
tuks.
rickshaws as well. Well, in
Yeah.
India, what's happened is most of the rickshaws have already gone on to CNGs.
Hmm.
So what we call auto rickshaw, they run on CNGs.
Yeah.
So these vehicles were running on diesel engines. Now they are promoting biofuels for them.
Hmm.
So there are
Yeah.
big up
Yeah. A
trust and
half step.
grants have been given.
Yeah, a half step. And honestly, the problems with biofuels are twofold. One of them is they get
Yeah,
put in place by mandates, fuel mandates, right? So
correct.
government says you
But
don't.
isn't it green? Isn't that green?
Well, it's greenish. Okay. So the problem with biofuels is they're not put in place by the right policy. So if you say you must not use fossils and you can use biofuel, then people will use biofuel. But the biofuel production methods end up using fossils because they can. So I'll give you an example of what happens in the United States. So in the United States, they have the same thing. They have a blending mandate for gasoline. 10% of gasoline must be ethanol, right?
Oh, that's happening in India as well. It started some time back. So
So
that they're
so they make this blend mandate, and it serves two purposes. One, the ethanol is there as an octane improvement and also as an oxygenate in the gasoline, so it serves an environmental function. But
to
the
one
other thing
extent
that
it
it
reduces the impact, right?
Yeah, and the second thing that it does is it reduces the amount of GHG emissions marginally. Okay, but the policy that's used to put the ethanol in the gasoline is not a carbon tax; it's a mandate. You will put ethanol in the gasoline. Okay, so
Well,
let's say
it's
that
it
you're a
still
corn
serves the
producer.
purpose, right?
Well, let's say you're a corn producer in the United States.
All right.
How do you fertilize your field? With ammonia. Where do you get the ammonia? You get it from hydrogen. Where do you get the hydrogen? from natural gas with no carbon capture. Okay. Then when you're plowing the field, what's your tractor running on? Fossil diesel. Not biodiesel? No, it's more expensive. Fossil diesel. And then when you take the corn
Well,
and you take it to
I agree with you. If you look at a 360-degree view, it's perfect. That's the way to look at it. But even if you don't use it to do 10% of fuel to be injected with this is anyway done, right? When you're anyway growing it, by doing it, at least we are going to impact it. Irrespective of it, we still grow the corn, we still grow the.
so in corn production, corn ethanol production, even despite the fact that there's no carbon tax to punish these stupid things, okay? So when they make the ethanol, okay, they make beer and they have to distill the ethanol from the beer. So they have to make heat. And how do they do that right now? Natural gas. Now, why do they burn natural gas? Because it's cheap and there's no carbon tax. They have corn stover, the stems and the cobs and the leftover junk from the corn production, some of which you need to use in the field, but most of it is a kind of a waste, right? You could burn that instead, but it would be more expensive. So they don't burn it. They burn natural gas. You see? Or you put a carbon tax in place, they all switch to burning corn stover. 100%. Okay. So if you want to make biofuels better, put in place a carbon tax. Get rid of the blend mandate, put a carbon tax in place. Because I guarantee you, some of the people that thought they were going to use ethanol as a fuel for their engine vehicle, they're going to switch to electric because it's cheaper. Okay. And some people that were making ethanol that were thinking, oh, well, I could burn natural gas, or I could burn waste wood or corn stover or whatever I have around because that isn't carbon taxed. They're going to change how they run their operation, okay? And they're going to reduce the emissions intensity of the ethanol further and further because it saves them money, you see? So if you implement the right policy, you get better outcomes. And if you have bad policy, it produces perverse incentives that create problems that are new ones that need to be solved also, you see? So my thinking is let's stick with biofuels for only those applications that can't be electrified. And we know there are some that can't be electrified. Those
What
are
about
no
biogas?
regret. Well, biogas, see, the thing about biogas is fantastic, but we'll never make enough biogas to replace fossil gas. So biogas we should use in those applications where we really need fire. And there are a few. Okay. There are some applications where you need a radiant flame in order to do some process or another. And biogas would be a perfect substitution in those applications. One example would be the last step in making cement is what they call clinkering. And in clinkering, you have a big drum that's lined with refractory material, insulation material. And inside you have a big fire. And you expose that solid material to the fire, it partially melts and it makes balls of this material that are then ground up to make cement. And they actually like coal the best for that process because the little glowing particles radiate lots of heat to the solid and do the clinkering very well. If they put natural gas in, they can do it, but it's harder. Biogas would be a good substitution in that application, as would the char that's left over when you make biofuels by pyrolysis. You could use that char either as an agricultural amendment, and hence you get some carbon capture, or you can use it in making cement, and you get some benefit from that. And the CO2 that's going back to the atmosphere, it was recently in the atmosphere. So, I like biofuels as an idea. I just think that we have the wrong policies in place to encourage them. And I also think that they're not going to be a major substitution for fossil energy. I think they'll be an important one, but a minor one.
Well,
Like a
in
small.
India, there are financial aid provided to set up plants, and there are also being, trying to create
And there are
market
smart
for
and
them.
yep, there are smart and dumb ways to go about doing all of those things, right? And we have to keep our eyes on what we're trying to accomplish. And the
Right.
trouble is that what happened in the United States is that this became an agricultural subsidy program
Correct.
that looked like it was environmental. And in reality, it was more agricultural subsidy than environmental. If they put a carbon tax in place, then they would get both benefits, right? And they would get a real reduction in the emissions intensity of the ethanol that they produced. But of course, they wanted to give money to farmers, and so that was more important.
Well, unfortunately, the thought is very similar even out here in India.
Yeah,
So yeah,
but
it's
again,
more a political
biofuels.
issue than an economic or a technology or a sustainability thought process behind it.
I think biofuels are extremely important, but we should reserve them for those applications where we really need
Mm,
fuels. Aviation,
right.
long distance shipping, remote and rural transport. That's it. Everything else, decarbonization by electrification, or better still, by substitution. I mean, I didn't fly to India to talk to you today, right?
Correct.
We're moving
Correct.
information back and forth. And this is
Right.
the pandemic taught us that we can do this better than we thought, right?
Well,
And
well,
and if we
Paul,
don't use energy, that's best, right?
that's true. Paul, now, if you were to give advice to entrepreneurs, see, we have a lot of startup founders who follow us. So, if you are to tell them, advise them, what are the areas to look at from a point of opportunity in the energy and sustainable commuting? I mean, if you can suggest it in from a sustainable commuting, energy storage, battery. I mean, there are a lot of things that, I mean, with the EV
Yeah.
market, one things are opening up, but are there some things that you want to point them to, not just from an India point of view, globally, what kind of opportunities they can see and
So
you could drive, give them some kind of a direction?
yeah, well, again, I think we have to be careful because we need to not put the cart before the horse. So what
Hmm.
would make sense to work on? You have to the big problem that I find with a lot of inventors is that they invent something and then they try to find a market for it. And the successful innovators start with a customer.
Right.
Okay. They start with the customer. They ask the customer, what problems do you have? And then they solve the problems for the customer. And they solve them in a way better than anybody else did before.
No, but
And
sometimes, like Steve Jobs said, right? Customer has no clue about his problem, so let me solve it for them.
yeah, well, I mean, there's the old story about the old story about Henry Ford, and
Right.
he said if I asked the customer would say that he wanted a faster horse. Okay, so
Exactly.
there's some
Yeah.
truth to that matter, but the most important thing that I can say in relation to this decarbonization thing is, to use the same analogy, you can't put the cart before the horse. If there's no value proposition there, there's no business there. And wishing that there would be one because that would make the world better is not, hope is not a strategy.
Correct.
Okay. Hope is desirable and necessary for humans, but the hope that we have has to be found within the limits of physics.
Right.
And you can't make a value proposition for yourself where there is none. And this is the thing that I constantly see is people trying to wake up old dead things and turn them into something. And they're not honest about why they failed last time. Hydrogen is the perfect example. And people, not really being very creative about what they're doing and imagining that somehow there'll be a value proposition because that would make the world better if there was one. And we have to be more honest with ourselves and more adult. And there are very rare occasions where people can find examples of a decarbonization technology that works and makes money even without society being serious enough to put a cost on CO2 emissions. I mean, if we don't stop using the atmosphere as if it was a free or very cheap public sewer, right? If that alternative, I use the analogy of what I did. I'm in the addition on my house. I built an addition to my house. And when I built the addition to my house, I very laboriously separated all the material from the demolition, and I piled up all the wood and I cut it up into firewood sized pieces. And I burned all of it in my wood stove in my garage for heat because it did two things. It gave me heat energy, and the other is it got rid of waste that I have to pay to dispose of, right? But if the alternative was that I could dump it over the neighbor's fence and pay nothing, I could have saved a lot of labor. You see? And this is the thing with the CO2. We dump to the atmosphere for free, and yet we expect people to not dump stuff in the atmosphere for free anymore. What, by choice? Because makes them feel better to not do it? Again, we have to be more adult, and we have to realize that economics are, they drive behavior in the market. And as a consequence, you can't just wish for a value proposition. You have to actually have one, and it has to be a realistic one. So
Fantastic.
yeah, I mean, energy storage is huge. Huge companies are working on it. The big problem in energy storage is grid storage. The solution to grid storage requires deep pockets, the deepest pockets in the world, because there's no path for grid energy storage to get there. Okay, other than just doing it at scale. There's no cell phone to take your expensive batteries that you make at the beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's those things like batteries that are huge, massive, that are no good for use in mobile applications, but are very, very cheap. There's no path to scale for them. So if you don't have $1 billion, go home, work on something else. Seriously. And this is true of many, many other things. There are people working on the big problems in the world, and it's nice to work on them. And maybe you'll get somewhere, maybe you won't. But the problem is the path to scale is very difficult. And I love to give an example from my former company's history. In fact, it happened before I worked for them. There was a company that was developing pyrolysis technology, they were trying to make gasoline from wood, right? Gasoline and char from wood.
Mm-hmm.
And making gasoline is very desirable because, of course, there's a lot of gasoline made in the world and sold. But they woke up one day and they said, we're trying to make something that's cheaper than bottled water. Gasoline is so cheap that you can buy it for less than bottled water, So as a consequence, because it's made at giant scale and so it's distributed in very efficient infrastructure and so on, so they woke up and they said, maybe we're pursuing the wrong market. So instead, what they did is they set up a little factory and they made this material they call liquid smoke.
Okay.
And liquid smoke is a flavoring that's used to make things taste smoky, like in barbecue sauce for meat.
Okay.
And that stuff sells for much more than bottled water.
Wow.
And by the way, it's the same process.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So they found a way to sell the thing that they were making before with less processing for more money. Now, this is smart, right? It's clever. And by doing that, they generated revenue that they could pour into research and development to develop the gasoline making technology, which never went anywhere. But still, they at least had some revenue that they could use to generate. They made some high volume product, small volume, but high value, that allowed them to make some money. And this is wise. And so many people go after the big prize, and then where are they going to get the billions of dollars to pursue that thing at scale? It's fantasy, right? So seeing something in front of you that you can exploit for money makes more sense. And so few people pursue that for some reason or other. They're all focused on, I'm going to be the solver of the next big problem. And this is hubris, right? Bite, you know what they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? Don't try to eat them in one gulp. You have to try to pick off little pieces one at a time. And each step, if you can make each step make economic sense, you will, maybe eventually you will attract the investment necessary to make a go of it. And sometimes you're just in the wrong business. I mean, I love to tell people the story about how different it is working for a company that made pilot plants and now being an independent consultant completely on my own, who hires his time only by the hour. when I was working for a pilot plant company, sometimes people would come in and say, "Hey, do you think I need a pilot plant?" And I say, "Buddy, I make hammers. I sell hammers. And you're asking me if I need a hammer? Of course you need a hammer. You need 10 hammers. Different.
Right.
You're asking the wrong guy. Not the right question to ask me, right?" So, in the old days, working for the pilot plant company, somebody would come in and say, "I've got 1,000,000 sow's ears, pig's ears, and I'm going to make one silk purse," right? And so at the pilot plant company, they say, "We need a pilot plant to do this." And we'd say, "Okay, do you have funding?" "Oh, yeah, yeah. These big venture capitalist guys gave us hundreds of millions of dollars. We're ready to go." And we say, "Okay, great. When can we get started?" Right? And now if somebody comes to me and says, "I've got this great idea. I want to make one silk purse from 1,000,000 sow's ears," then I can say, "You're in the wrong business. You're absolutely in the wrong business. There's no way, doesn't matter how beautiful a silk purse you make, it's never going to make you money. Instead, make dog food." Because you've got 1,000,000 sour ears.
Right.
It's a lot of meat.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a great message that just don't get into something because there's an opportunity. Look at what you have and you can do at the core. I think it's
Never neglect the path to scale also. If your thing
right.
makes sense only at a giant scale because that's the only way that it can be cheap enough, then if you can't imagine the path to scale and you can't see how the path to scale would be created, or the path to scale requires interventions on the part of business or government that don't make sense or are unlikely to happen,
Good.
I'm sorry, you got to find something else to do. Even if your idea is the best idea that there ever was in terms of technical feasibility, if the path to scale is missing, then it's going to be unlikely that you will succeed. And maybe people will
Very true.
succeed
Yeah.
out of the ashes of your failure. And this is the worst. This tastes worse than merely being defeated. When someone buys your patents out of your bankruptcy, and then because they have access to the billions of dollars, they take your idea and they commercialize it. This is the worst.
So true. So true. Paul, wonderful. Thank you so much. And this was great. And for the listeners and audience, please come back again because we're going to get some predictions out of Paul. We're going to get some bit of future gazing. And that should be fun because I'm sure you heard, you've seen till now. So don't know what to expect, but come back for that. And until then, enjoy the ride. Paul, once again, thank you so much for this.
This is a pleasure.